we talked about in the last class, the next project that you're going to be doing is involving the idea of 3D, either using perspective or isometric projection, which is a form of perspective. But it's a way of representing the world three-dimensionally on a two-dimensional surface. So that's what we're going to look at. Illustrator, as we've already seen, has some great tools for this. So we've got the 3D effects, which in the last version of Illustrator, they've incorporated these new 3D effects as well. And then we've also got the perspective grid tool, which we've looked at. So the next, one of the things I wanted to do in today's class is go over some of the demonstrations for that. And I'm going to do it in the context of the next worksheet. So worksheet number 4 is all geared towards these kind of treatments, ways of representing the world three-dimensionally using Adobe Illustrator. We'll also talk briefly about graphic styles, and if we have time, I'll talk about using symbols and the symbol sprayer. I think that I'll probably just about do it. So just like the last couple of worksheets that I've given you, I've set up a worksheet which has a template layer. And above that, it's got a layer for you to work on. So basically, you're just copying what these different things are. I'm going to do some of the demonstrations in today's class, and then I'll do some of them in Wednesday's class if we run out of time. Some of them we've already done. So we've done this one before, but I'm going to review some of the ones I've done before just to kind of so that we have it all in one place. So this week's demonstrations will all be based around this worksheet. So the first of these is the arches. I'll do this one real quick. I'm going to do this fairly quickly because we've done this one before. And you'll have a video, of course, so you'll be able to go back and kind of review what you've done. But basically, the process that we go through is, first of all, we set up a series of guides. So I'll draw one as a rectangle, which represents the picture plane, if you like. And I'll do Command 5 or Control 5 if you're on a PC. So this is View. And then you go down to Guides. Everything to do with guides is under here. So this exercise really gets into using guides quite a lot. So here, Make Guides is that Command 5 keyboard shortcut that we're going to use quite a lot in this exercise. And then if you bring up the rulers, which you can do by going to View, Rulers, Show Rulers, or Command R, we can then drag down a horizontal guide, which goes down to around about a third of the way up through the picture plane, or maybe a quarter of the way up, something like that. This is going to be our horizon line or eye level. And then with the pen tool, you want to have smart guides on when you're doing this so that you know when you're on the anchor point. So remember, smart guides is under View, Smart Guides, or Command U, Control U. And then I'll click through from anchor. I want to go down to this horizon line or eye level, and on the guide, create a point. I don't want it to be exactly in the middle, but fairly close to the middle. And then I'll create a V shape like that with the pen tool by clicking 3 times, 1, 2, 3. Command 5 to make that into a guide. And then I'll go down here. And I'm going to do the same thing in the opposite direction. So these are what are referred to as orthogonal lines, which are the lines which lead to the vanishing point. And if you go into outline mode and you unlock the guides by doing Option Command semicolon, you'll then be able to select these and move them around. So that keyboard shortcut on a PC is Alt Control semicolon. So you can move these around wherever you want, and that's your position for where everything's going to go to in terms of the vanishing point. All right, I'm going to leave it about there, and I'm going to lock up the guides again. It's important that we lock up the guide so that when we're drawing on it, we don't accidentally move them. I'm going to draw an ellipse which starts in the top corner and goes across until it touches the guide on the opposite side. So I've got a circle which touches on the top, the 2 sides. Doesn't matter where it falls at the bottom. It might go above or below the horizon line. It's irrelevant. Then I will use the rectangle tool and I'll draw a guide which starts off lined up with the center, but somewhere outside the circle, just to make sure I'm overlapping it. And I'm going to draw a rectangle that completely covers that circle. Then select both of those shapes. This one looks like it has some kind of an effect on it. You see how the black is missing there? So let's go to the appearance panel. And it doesn't, it might just be a screen tweak. I'm going to select this shape and then I'm going to go to Pathfinder. and I'm going to choose minus front. So we get rid of that part of the shape. Actually, I missed a step here. I want another shape for this circle. So I'm going to double click on the scale tool, and let's set this time to 75% and hit copy. So we've got a slightly smaller version of the circle. We select both of them. So there's two circles which have got a white fill and a black stroke. If I do Command 8, it won't really look any different, but if I color it, you can see that there's now a hole in the middle. If I put this rectangle to the back, you'd see it even better perhaps. So that's going in front of the rectangle. I really want that in the front now. Select both of these and do minus front. So remember, what we're creating here is an arch. This is the top of the arch. I can draw a rectangle from this anchor point and go down to here where it says anchor again. Drag this rectangle. I'm using the group selection tool so that it doesn't have the bounding box. That way I can drag from the path across until it touches the guide on the other side. That way I know it'll line up exactly here. I can select all those three shapes and unite them to make it into one shape. So this is now one shape. I don't need the stroke on it, so let's get rid of that. And then I'm going to scale this towards the vanishing point. So this is really what this exercise is about. It's about the idea of creating a sense of perspective, right? This is what's called 1-point perspective because we're using one vanishing point. And I'm going to option click or alt click if I'm on a PC where it says anchor right here. So right on the vanishing point. And I'm going to set this to 90% and hit copy. This is going to form the back of the arch. And it'll actually show up as the underside of the arch. So I'm going to send this to back. And you can see now that this basically looks like an arch, except that at the bottom, it doesn't look like the front and the back connect. So I'm going to select the back shape. With the pen tool, I can then add an anchor point. And with the direct selection tool, I can move it over. So remember, if I hold Command, whilst I'm on the pen tool, it'll give me the direct selection tool and I can drag that over. Bear with me for 1 second. I have to just plug my laptop in. Once I've got that completed, these angles from here should automatically line up with the vanishing point. So if you were to draw a line through here to check to make sure you got this right, if you just do that, you can see that this lines up exactly with the vanishing point. Okay, so now I can select this. I'll select both of those shapes. I'll group them so that I have them together. And then with the selection tool, I'm going to choose the scale tool and option click again on that same vanishing point. So now we're scaling the arches together, both the back and the front. I'm going to set this now to say 60% and hit copy. So now we get a smaller version of that shape a little bit further back. I can do Command D now, all the way back to create the set of arches that run in perspective. And you can see that no matter how far you go back, your arches should be still on that vanishing point all the way back because we're scaling it to that same position. So that's the first exercise, is creating those arches. The second one is a continuation of this one, really, because I'm going to have you make the tile floor, which goes underneath it. So if I lock this layer, or actually let's select the arches. I'm going to create a new layer, drag this to here. I'll call it arches. On yours, you don't necessarily have to do this because you're going to work on the template probably, although you could work on a separate file and bring them together at the end. But I just wanted to put these separately from the guide so I can turn this off for a second. You could just hide it by doing Command 3, but I'm just going to turn this layer off. So now I've got these guides. Now what I want to do is to create a tile which goes onto here. So the tile I'm going to create is going to be this wide, so as wide as the pillar sort of thing on the arch. And then this distance going back would be foreshortened. So it would need to be shorter than from here to here. We're going to just eyeball this. So I would say probably around about that. So this is that idea of foreshortening. As things go away from you, they become shorter, right? So if something is laying down, like a floor, you're looking across the floor, the distance, the height of the tile, if it's a square, would be shorter than the width of it. Then I'm going to draw with the pen tool into those spaces, clicking on where it says intersect each time. This one is probably going to be anchor because we're down at the end of that path, and then we'll connect back together. Then we make one tile. We fill one tile, I should say. Drag this across to the other side. If I position this right in the very corner, like this, to put the back into perspective, I'll drag these top anchor points across till this one hits that orthogonal line. So now I could draw a line through here, and this should line up with the vanishing point. As you can see, it does. Once I've got those two tiles, we're going to use the blend tool to blend between them. So if I choose the blend tool here, I click on corresponding points. This is important. So top right to top right, it could be top left to top left, but you don't want to do top right to top left or something like that. There needs to be the corresponding points. Once you've got the tiles, if you wanted to change the number, you could double click on the blend tool, change it to specified steps. If I did it 3, we would then have it looking like this. And if I set it to 5, it would look like this. So I'm going to leave it on 5, press OK. And then I'm going to blend it back towards the vanishing point. So again, I choose the scale tool, option, click on the vanishing point. I'm going to try 85%, put preview. And then I can see by this guide, it actually needs to go a little bit more. So let's try 82%. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and hit copy and then do Command D all the way back. If I put my arches back on, then that's the final result. So on the worksheet that I set up, those are the first two. The next one is this perspective house. So we had done this one previously as well. Remember that when you're starting this, you're going to start off with 2 pieces of flat artwork for the house, and then we'll construct it using the perspective grid. You don't necessarily have to get it to be exactly the same as what I'm doing when you're doing the worksheet. I would like you to try to copy them as close as you can. But really what I'm interested in is that you understand the process involved. So for the windows on this, I'm just going to make a black box here that goes inside that kind of creates the frame. Obviously, you could also maybe put a stroke around the outside. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the knife tool. And I'm going to cut through here. When you're using the knife tool, if you want to create a straight line, you have to hold both Shift and Option. And then I'm going to use the anchor point tool. And I'm going to drag this up just a little bit to create the window. And then we'll keep it simple for right now. So you could put shadows and curtains and reflections and stuff if you want, but we'll keep it simple. Okay, so with these, I want to center it better. Let's pull this over and let's bring this one in just a little bit. And we'll bring this one in just a little bit. Okay, that should do. I'll take all 3 of these. So I selected all 3 and then held Shift to deselect the background shape. And then I'll duplicate them down. For the door, I'm going to bring this further down to the bottom. And then I'm also going to have this be slightly different here. So we want one surface that looks kind of like this, straight on. And then the other part of it, because I want you to make a apex on the roof, the other side of the house, we're going to do basically the same height. So I can draw a rectangle like this. I'll make it a little bit narrower. I'll use these windows again over here. I need to bring them to the front because my rectangle was lower than that. Let's bring those up a little bit. And then with this shape, I'm going to give it an apex by adding an anchor point in the middle and dragging that anchor point up with the direct selection tool. So once you have those two shapes, I'll bring up the perspective grid. And then if you select one of these, we need to drag it using the perspective selection tool. So I drag this into position. I'm actually going to hold Option to duplicate it, just in case I ever want to go back, because once I've put it in perspective, there isn't a way to sort of take it out of perspective. Same with this one. So this time I want to switch the surface to the orange surface and then drag this one into position here. In this particular case, they line up with each other because of the fact that they're in this 0 position. If I position them anywhere else on the picture plane, I could, but these may not end up lining up in terms of scale. So you might have to take one of them and scale it down. So I'll leave that for right now, but you could scale it using the perspective selection tool, remember, holding Shift, of course, to constrain the proportions. Okay, if I select one side of this, I might also want to darken it a little bit by going up to here and then adjusting the color slightly. So if I went into advanced options and then went to edit and I make it all just a little bit darker, you'll see that that side of the house now has a little bit of shading to it. I think because the window shape was white, this won't have actually changed. Oh no, yeah, see, it's still 0. So this should probably be really a little bit grayed out. If I'd put like 1% gray in these windows, it would have made it easier for that just to adjust, by the way. All right, so now I've got that. I'm going to take this shape. I only need the shape, not the windows, but this shape of the wall. And I want to drag it back to find where the other end of the building would be. So to do this, I'm going to hold the number 5 key. So this will make it drag towards the opposing vanishing point. So instead of going to the vanishing point, which is going currently over here, by holding 5, it'll allow me to drag it towards that other vanishing point. So I can define where the end of the building is now. I hold Option to duplicate it. Now we know where that wall position is. It actually needs to go back a little bit further. No, it's probably back. Okay, so once I've got that, I can then connect this roof together. If I take this anchor point right here and drag it up and connect it together, we now have that part of it. So that's that one. This next one, I don't think we've really looked at this. We had looked at the mesh tool a little bit earlier on, but I'm not sure if we did it in much detail. So on this one, basically, I'm using the mesh tool as a way to create form. So it's really looking primarily at chiaroscuro, although the yellow square is also very basically put into perspective. And then at the bottom, there's also a cast shadow. So the way you would do this, we need the shape of the apple, first of all. So you want to use the pen tool. And to create this shape, I'm going to start off by clicking and dragging. This is the top of the apple, right in the middle. I'm going to drag horizontally, and then I'll go up a little bit and drag horizontally. And then I'll go down to the side of the apple, and I'll click and drag basically vertically, but at a little bit of an angle in towards the middle. And then I'm going to go down to the bottom here and click and drag slightly. And then we'll go over to the middle here and click and drag. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Now you could reflect it, of course, But an apple is an organic shape, so it's not exactly perfect. It's not exactly a reflection of itself. You know, it's slightly asymmetrical always. So once you're happy with the shape, you want it to have no stroke, and you want to have a base color, something which, you know, you could build off of the overall color of the fruit or whatever it is, the object that you're drawing. I'll make some final little adjustments here to the shape. And then once I've got to the point where I'm happy with the shape of it, the next thing I want to do is to apply the grid, which is going to make or the mesh, I should say, which is going to make the tonal values change. And we could do this in a couple of ways. So you could either apply the mesh by using the mesh tool, and you can click through, oops, wrong one. We can click through the shape like this. I'm going basically diagonally through the shape to add those different positions. And you want roughly that number of divisions across the surface. If you have too many, it becomes cumbersome to work with. And if you don't have enough, you're not really going to be able to control it well enough. So roughly something like this. Another way to approach adding those is to go under Object, and then we can go to Create Gradient Mesh, and we can adjust the number of divisions. So let's say I did 8 by 8. That's basically what I'd done previously. If I go ahead and press OK, we'll end up with something that looks like this. So now we have that, we can go in, and with the direct selection tool, it's important that you're on the direct selection tool. Remember, that's the one that selects individual points. We can select a point on that shape, within the shape, and we can change its tonal value. So you could also change its color, its hue, by the way. But for right now, we're just making certain parts of it lighter. So if I click here on the one that's next to it, I could then choose the eyedropper. Double click on the eyedropper and make sure appearance is unchecked. Otherwise, it won't be able to choose the color. And then go ahead and eyedropper somewhere between these 2 points. By doing that, it'll spread that tonal value further. So if I select these ones and click here, it'll spread it a little bit further there. If I select this one, and I'm doing this with keyboard shortcuts, so I'm on the eyedropper. Command will give me the direct selection tool, so I can click on the anchor point that I want to choose. And then I can eyedropper the tonal value down to there. Hold Command, Control if you're on a PC, click on the anchor point, and then eyedropper to say there to spread that tonal value. And you can see now how that starts to form a sort of highlight on that surface of the shape. At the bottom edge right here, I'm going to use this tool, the lasso tool, and I'm going to go into outline mode, and I'm going to select all the way along, starting around about there. I'm going to go all the way around this side of the shape. And I'm going to make all of this a little bit darker. Then if I want to spread that a little bit further into the shape, we might want to select the next row over, so I can go all the way through here. And then I can eyedropper from somewhere between those 2 points. So it spreads that tonal value further. Here, I might want to spread it a little bit more. Along this edge even, I might have a little bit of that tonal value. As it goes around the shape, it might get slightly more shadow. Along this edge as well, I might add a little bit more of that tonal value. And I might continue to spread it up here by selecting certain points and pulling it further into the shape. At the top here, I'm going to want to create like a dent in the shape where the stem comes out of. So if I select this point, which is in the middle, and I darken it by choosing this darker tone, and we'll select this one as well, actually. Now what I want to do is bring these points, the ones that are below it, up. So you see how that forms like a much sharper edge now? It's not quite right because those paths overlap weirdly and they create sort of weird striations. But I can use the direct selection tool and pull those paths back, or those handles back, so that there isn't that overlap of shapes. So we don't get that weird edge. This one also might want to come up. This one might pull over. It's almost like doing sculpture where like manipulating a material, dragging it around. This one, I'm going to pull the handle back. And I'll pull this one back also. So you can see how that starts to form this kind of shape. Maybe on this point, as it's higher up, we have a little bit of a highlight again. Maybe along this edge even, there's a little bit of highlight that comes across here. You can see how you can start to modulate the form quite quickly. Here, I'm going to go in here and shift the hue over to a more like orangey color. Now, in contrast to the green, it's going to look surprisingly red. So I'll choose a color that's not quite as intensely red as you would expect, just because it tends to kind of exaggerate it because of the fact that it's next to a color which is its complementary color. So we can again spread some of that color to other parts of it by selecting anchor points which are close by and eyedroppering the color. So again, I'm holding Command or Control on a PC whilst I'm on the eyedropper to give me the direct selection tool, so I can click on an anchor point that I want to control, and then I can choose how I want to spread the tonal value across from there. So that's the apple itself. Above that, to create the stem, I'm going to draw with the pen tool a shape that looks something like this. So click and drag. Click to remove the trailing handle. Click to go back and create a curve. And then here, I'm going to have it come down again as one path. I want this to curve a little bit more. Let's pull this a little bit more like that. So again, I'm holding Command to give me the direct selection tool so I can manipulate the shape. I'm going to choose a brown color for the stem. And then again, with the mesh tool, I'm going to create a mesh across the surface by clicking on the different parts of the shape. This is a little trickier with shapes like this because the mesh doesn't sort of fit so neatly into something like a circular shape. But here now I could add a highlight. We could lighten this part of it. And maybe we bring this closer to it so it creates kind of a little edge. Pull this over a little bit. Let's make that less saturated. So I'll gray it out a little bit. I could go into here and make it darker. Maybe along this edge, I'm going to select this anchor point and this anchor point and make those darker. And let's also select one in here and make it darker. So we then start to get these shadows forming on that stem, which give it more of a sense of it being a sort of real three-dimensional stem. Scale that a little bit. For the leaf, which is a demonstration I had done previously, I think, I start off with a rectangle of the basic green that I want to use, and then I create a mesh that goes across the surface, something like this. So in the middle, I want to have three which are fairly close together. You can always move them afterwards if you need to. So if it's easier to do them whilst they're separated, I want to select through this middle one. So I'm just using the direct selection tool. I'll eyedropper its overall color so that it's one color, and then I'll shift that to a lighter tonal value. Because these are close together, if you look at these, they're very close together here. That transition is very rapid. Here, I'm going to make it darker. So I'll darken this green up a little bit. Here, I'm going to make it lighter again. Actually, let's put one more in here. I'll put another blend in here. And then on this row right here, we'll make it lighter. So we could eyedropper this color. We might also take this row then, and you could move it closer this way if we wanted to spread it, or I could move this one closer that way if I wanted to spread it. So you could use this just for creating gradients if you find that it gives you more control. And sometimes I do prefer to do the gradient like this rather than just using a gradient. But the other thing that's kind of cool about it is that if we put a shape above this, so I'm going to use the shape of a leaf above this gradient. So just so you can see this better, I'll make this darker. So I've got a shape over the top of it, and then I select everything, and I go to Object, Envelope, Distort, Make with Top Object. We can maybe squash that. It also has an envelope around it, so you could still manipulate this shape further by dragging these points around that are associated with the anchor. Sorry, it's associated with the object, with the envelope. And then I'll bring this up and attach it to the leaf. So let's make this a little bit smaller. On the one that I'm showing in the template, it also has a little bit of a shadow cast to it. So to do that, I'm going to make a duplicate of this, copy, paste in back. I'm then going to expand it so that it's no longer in an envelope. It still has the mesh on it, by the way, but it isn't inside that envelope that was distorting it. And then I'm going to make this one color that we can use as the shadow. And I'm going to rotate this around a little bit. And I'm also going to lower the opacity and change the blending mode to multiply. So that's kind of creating a shadow effect. If we then went to Object, Envelope, Distort, Make with Mesh, and I put a mesh on it, this would allow me to distort it a little bit further. So maybe I want to bring this down so that it starts to feel like more like it's wrapping around the shape of the apple itself, you know. So this side here, for instance, I might want to select all of these points and drag it down like that. So I'd want to manipulate this a little bit further, but that's the general idea. I'm also going to select it and go to transparency. Let's make sure we have it fully selected. In the transparency panel, I'm going to have it gradually fade out. The transparency panel somewhere. Where is it? Let me clean up my workspace. So in the transparency panel, I'm going to add a mask by clicking Make Mask. And then I'm going to choose Clip so that we take that black out of the mask. Then I'm going to click on the mask icon so that I'm working on the mask. And I'm going to draw a rectangle over it, which has a gradient that goes from black to white. And then I'm going to run the gradient. So I'm going to drag the gradient here up, actually down, so that that shadow is also kind of fading out a little bit. So we could lower the opacity. We also might want to blur it slightly. So if we went to blur, Gaussian blur, and we could just soften the shadow just a little bit. So something like that. Underneath it, to create the shadow, I'm going to use the same technique that we'd done on one of the other worksheets, which was where you had done a sphere, and then I had you create a shadow with a blend underneath it. So if I send this to the back, and then I create another ellipse, which is bigger than this one, and make it white, and send it to back, and then I blend between these two, this will then create a shadow. If I wanted to put it onto a surface, I can draw a rectangle. Now, to make the shadow feel like it's fitting onto that surface, I can change the blending mode to multiply. And then for this shape, to give it some perspective, let's just drag these corners in and drag this up. So that's this one. The next one that we're going to do is to create a 3D building with windows mapped to the surface. So you don't necessarily have to put all of this detail that I've put in here, but I would like you to create a isometric building, and you're going to do this using the classic 3D effects. And then with the classic 3D effects, you can map images to the surface. So you need to create a flat image for the windows, and then a flat image for the type on the side. I'm going to get a screen capture of this just so I can have a reminder of what this looks like whilst I'm working on it. Personally, I find it easier to work in a separate file, but you don't necessarily have to work this way. You could work all on the worksheet if you want. Okay, so this is what we want to create next. So it's going to start with a rectangle. And it's useful if the rectangle is a particular size, because it kind of makes it easier to work with, makes it easier to remember numbers and things like that. So here, it's 308. I may as well make it 300, I think. And then I'll make this 200. It's close enough. So just make it easier to work with. And then I'm going to change the color of this. And then I'm going to go to Effects, 3D, and Materials, and then choose 3D Classic and choose Extrude and Bevel. At this section here where it says Position, I'm going to change it to Isometric Top. I have to move this a second. Then we need to figure out the height of it. So I'm going to set this to 500 and then go ahead and press OK. So for the design for the windows, I need to have a symbol, and the symbol needs to be the same width as this front. If I'm doing this surface here, that's in isometric, and then the height needs to be the same as the extrusion depth, which was 500. So this right here, if I remember, was 300. So it's 300 by 500. This will be the front of the building, and then we'll add the windows and the balconies and so on. So for the windows, I'm just going to draw a rectangle again. Let's switch this. And I'll put a little bit of a curve on the top, like we did with the last one. For right now, I'll just keep this simple, but basically you're going to develop a window for it. You could add highlights over the top of it. So, you know, maybe you do something like this where you create another shape on the inside that's a little bit smaller, make it a different gray, get rid of the stroke, maybe curve the top. And then with the knife tool, I can just slash through it. And then we could either change the tonal value on a couple of these, or you could delete them. So it sort of makes it look a little bit like there's some reflected glass. Okay, so once I've got one window, when I was first demonstrating this, I'd introduced you to the idea of using symbols. There's a couple of reasons for using symbols. So one of them, if we're going to map something to a 3D object, we need it to be a symbol. So we're going to use it for that. But also in this context, I have this one window. So if I add the window into the symbols panel, as I'm going to reuse it again, it won't add additional memory to it. So when I duplicate this, it won't make my Illustrator file a bigger size. So if we're duplicating this a lot, which we are going to do here, scale that a little bit smaller. This will reduce your file size quite drastically if you do it in this sort of way, where you're just using a duplicate of a symbol rather than a duplicate of objects. At the bottom here, I'm going to change it a little bit because I want to add a window in here. So I'm going to get rid of this. And for right now, I'm just going to put a simple version of what I had previously. And again, we might add some reflective surface. So if I did a rectangle here, and then I make a duplicate of that. Let's make this a little thinner. I'll select both of them and scale them so that they fit into there. And then again, with the knife tool, we could slice through some of these. And then we can select the bits that we want and change the tonal value. Okay, so once you've got the side of your building created, the one graphic, select the whole thing and drag all of that into your symbols panel. Remember that we're going to use it this time so that the symbol can be applied to the 3D object. So this will be front building. Okay, we don't need it here. If I ever want it again, I can always drag it out. Another advantage of the symbols that I wanted to point out is, let's say I go into here and I double click on this window. If I wanted to modify it, so for instance, let's say I went into here and added a white line that goes across here. And then we go out of that, it'll be added to that same symbol. So you can adjust all of your symbols at once by doing that, or all of the times that that symbol has been used then. So now I've got this as a symbol, it's stored inside of here. So if I select this 3D object, if you ever want to edit a 3D object, or if you want to edit anything which has an effect on it, if you want to edit its effect, you would go to the appearance panel. And anything which is an appearance is listed here. So we have the stroke and the fill are appearances. Remember, if it's in outline mode and you don't see it, then it's probably an appearance. So the 3D effect is an appearance. It shows up here in the appearance panel. I'll click on that, go to map art, and then you have these various surfaces. So in this case, as it's a cube-like shape, it has 6 surfaces. So I need to find the right surface. I want this one that's on the front. And there's a red line that indicates the surface that you're on. So that's the bottom of the box. This is one side, and then this is the side that I actually want. So if I go down to here, front of building, it's upside down, but I can rotate it and hold shift so that it's the right way up. I also might want to put shade artwork on so it takes on the tonal values of the lighting that the 3D object has. And then we can go ahead and press OK. If I wanted to adjust the lighting, by the way, I can go to more options. I might want to put the light more on this side of the building, for instance. You could also add additional lights if you wanted to. Okay, so to add the other side would really be the same thing. You've got to make another graphic based off of this edge now. So that was 200 pixels. And again, the same height, so it'd be 500 pixels high. So you need to create another rectangle that's 200 wide and 500 high. And then you create the graphic that you want to put onto that surface. So it might include some windows, some typography. So here I'm going to do these, but I'm going to change them a little bit. I'm squash them so that they're narrower. Let's delete that one. And I'm just going to put one here, and then one there. And then on this one, if you see, I've put some 3D type on the side, or I've put some type in isometric on the side. I've also put like a little highlight on the edge as if the building sort of sticks out at that point. So if I go over to here, I might put a highlight here. And this would just be the same color made a little bit lighter, like a tint of that same color. And then on the other side, I'd want this rectangle to be exactly the same height as the original one. Same here. I'll duplicate this. And this time I'll use that same color, but make it a little bit darker. So it's creating a little bit of a shadow on that side. For the vertical type, remember, you can use the vertical type tool. One of the few occasions where this tool might be actually of some use. The word hotel in the sort of 1920s, 1930s, it became a common vernacular practice to have hotel or motel signs listed vertically like that. And so we all recognize it. It isn't an easy way to read something, but because of the context, I think it's fine. And then I demonstrated on this how we could make a kind of fake 3D version of the type. So let me go over that again as it ties into this idea of doing 3D. I basically have two versions, one which is the shadow. Let's scale this a little bit smaller. So we have one version which is the shadow. I'm going to do type create outlines. So this is just drawn objects, not types, no longer associated with the character panel. I'll make a duplicate of that type and I'll change its color. So I'm just going to make this a sort of off-white, light kind of yellowish color. And then I'm going to position this so that it's slightly offset from the black shadow. I'm going to lock that, and then I can easily select the black shape underneath it and manipulate it. So I want to, on this one, to use the pen tool and add a point anywhere along this path right here, and then hold command to give me the direct selection tool, control if you're on a PC, just like we did with the arches. So we're adding a point and we're moving it to connect the front and the back together. So it gives the illusion then that these shapes are connected through form. This is an interesting form of 3D in type, which is quite often used, particularly with vernacular type graphics from this era, where they had a sense of it being 3-dimensional, but really all they're doing is they're taking a flat graphic, offsetting it, and connecting them together. So it gives a sense of it being 3-dimensional. It's not true perspective by any means, but it gives you a little bit of an illusion of it having dimension. So you couldn't actually create this effect by using the 3D effects, because the 3D effects will give you a true 3-dimensional letterform, which means the letterforms would have to be at an angle. They couldn't be straight on to us like this. So this is a stylization of perspective or dimension. Okay, once we have what we need on the building, you're going to do exactly the same as we did with the last one. Oops. Let me do that again. I had my lighter colored type locked. So I was trying to move the whole thing together. There we go, that's better. Okay, so I make this into a symbol by simply dragging it into the symbols panel. And then we select our 3D shape again. We click on the 3D extrude in the appearance panel. We go to map art. We find the surface that we want. So it's this one right here. As you can see now, it's got a red line around it. And I can then choose this building side. Again, I'm going to have to rotate it. You could rotate it before you put it in, but I never really can quite tell which way it's going to end up, whether it's going to be upside down or not. But it's easy to convert it in here. Again, shade artwork should be on, and then I can go ahead and press OK. On this one also, I added like a little frame around the top of it, like a wall around the top of the building. So we could do this by doing this, watch. We make a duplicate of this building, so I'm going to drag this up. I don't need it to be this long, and we don't need the map art. So I'm going to go to map art and do clear all. And then for the extrude depth, let's change this to say 15 and then press OK. We could just make this into a stroke and then increase the thickness. So if I nudge this back down now, I'm going to change the color of it as well, just so that we can see it a little bit more clearly. And sometimes with these older buildings, they would have these edges around the top of the building that was a slightly different brick or something. So we've created a little wall there. If you wanted, another way that you could do it is once it gets to the point where you have the 3D version of it, before you change it into a stroke. So at this point, what we could do is do object path, offset path. I'm going to offset it by, that's probably about right actually, -6, and then we'll go ahead and press OK. So now we have a smaller shape inside. If I do Command 8 now, we then have a 3-dimensional shape. This time it fits right to the edge of the building. So I don't know why, but it's always slightly off. It's never quite bang on, but it should theoretically be exactly the same size. But then we have a top on the building. And I've also added these little kind of like air conditioning units for detail. As far as the exercise concerns, this is what I really want you to create, okay? So if you wanted to go further and add these other things just for yourself, but remember, you're going to do an illustration like this anyway. So for the exercise, you just need to complete that part of it, okay? Where you have a building and you've mapped 2 surfaces, all right? Okay, so that's that one. Let's see where we're at. The next one, we have this lamp to do. I've done that one before as well, so I'm going to leave that one for right now. But I'll do this one next. I haven't really focused too much on the 3D and materials, which is a new feature in Illustrator yet. There are advantages to the classic version of the 3D effects. And there are some advantages to these new 3D effects. So on this one, it uses the new 3D and materials to create this effect. So let me go over creating this one. I'm going to start off by creating a rounded rectangle. Obviously, you can start with a rectangle if you want, and then you can have it be rounded by using the direct selection tool and rounding the corners. So we want something kind of like this. If you want to set it to a specific amount, I'll set this to say 40. Now I want a smaller version of this. So I'm going to go to Object, Path, Offset Path. And I'm going to set this to say -20. Change this to white. And then I'm going to make another one, Object, Path, Offset Path. And I'm going to make it -30. And let's change the color of this one. Let's also round the corners a little bit. I'm going to make a slightly thinner version, a thin rectangular shape like this. And I'm going to put this at a bit of an angle like that. And I'm going to have this go through here a couple of times. On the one that I show, by the way, it doesn't have this part of it, but I figured I'd show it to you whilst I'm at it. But you don't actually have to do the stripes. Okay, and then I'm going to select these. Let's group all of this together. So I'm going to do Command G to group it. And then I'm going to go to Effects, 3D and Materials, choose Extrude and Bevel. And at the bottom here, I'm going to choose Isometric Top. I'm also going to go to Inflate, and I'm going to inflate it a little bit. I'm going to bring the depth down, so it's not inflated quite as much. Or sorry, bring the volume down actually. So it's not inflated quite as much as that. That's probably better. Let's bring the depth down a little bit. And then if you go over to lighting at the top, we can adjust the intensity of the light. You can also adjust the rotation of the light, like which angle it's at, the height of the light relative to the object, and how soft it is. You have a lot of control over it there. If I drag this down a little bit further, we also have shadows. So I can have the shadow and change the rotation angle of that so it comes at a different angle. And you can have it either behind or below. I want it here to be below, behind the object, like that. And if you want, you can displace it from the object. So if it was like floating, but in this case, we want it straight up against it. You also sometimes might want to adjust the shadow bounds. You can see how here it starts to cut off. So I need this to go all the way out. On the side of that, I have a small circle in a sort of wasabi green. And then I'm doing a similar kind of thing. So on the object, I'm going to inflate. I'm also going to isometric top. And then again, we could adjust the lighting if we wanted. So we could add the shadow and adjust the rotation. We could actually get the angle from the other one. It should really be the same as the other one, but I'll just eyeball it here. We can adjust the height of that and so on. So this is using the new 3D and materials effect. It gives you that ability to create those drop shadows, or those cast shadows, I should say, and also gives you that ability to inflate objects, which you couldn't do in the previous versions. This one's a very similar one. So this is also using the 3D effects, the new materials effect, to create this cup and the coffee inside of it. And then I'm using effects to create the steam that comes off of it. We'll do this in the same file. So for this, you need to have one line which looks kind of like this. And this will just be a stroke. So for right now, I'm going to give it a color just because it's a bit difficult to work with it when it's just in white because I can't see it very well. But eventually I'll make it white. I want some thickness to it. So let's add a little bit of thickness to it. And on the stroke ends, I'm going to round the caps. I might also want to round the corners so that this corner is rounded. So making sure that the object is fully selected, I can go up to here and set it so that the corner is rounded also. Inside that, I want to have another shape which fits exactly to the edge of the stroke. So here, and it would go to the end of this, where it rounds off. And then up to here. This shape is just going to be a fill, and I'll make this coffee colored. Let's make this a little bit thinner actually. Bring that in. So this should work. It's important that we group it, just like in the last one. So I group these objects together, and then I'm going to go to Effects, 3D, and Materials, and I'm going to choose Revolve. Now, when I'm revolving it this time, it's actually revolving it in the wrong direction. So we can go here and change it to right edge. Now it's revolving it in the right direction. And we can then choose isometric left or isometric right. It doesn't really matter here. Again, we can adjust the lighting settings. So we can adjust the intensity of the light. We can adjust the rotation of the light. So you can see how the shadows on the cup adjust. It's even creating this cast shadow on the inside. This is something that the old effects weren't really very good at, is that sort of lighting ability. So we can do stuff like that. All right, now I'm going to select this outside edge and change it back to white now that it's three-dimensional, we can see it. For the handle, I'm going to draw a shape starting with a circle. I'm going to delete one side. Let's again give it some different color so that we can see it. And I want to also extend this out a little bit. I'm going to have it come to here. And on this side, I'm going to have it come down and create a curve like that. So this will basically be the handle. Let's make that a little bit thicker. And let's also make it a little bit smaller. It's a little bit too big. Be about like that. Let's make it a little bit thicker. And then once I'm happy with that overall shape, I'm going to select it. And I'm going to go to Effects, 3D, and Materials. I'm going to choose Inflate. So now we've inflated it. Down at the bottom, I'm going to set it to isometric left, or actually isometric right. This needs to go behind the cup, and I can nudge that over to make it attach. So maybe somewhere around about there. And again, I'll change it back to white. So we have the handle done. For the smoke, I need to have some kind of background color. So I'm just going to put a dark color behind it. Otherwise, you won't really see the smoke effect very well. And for right now, I'll lock that. So Command 2 to lock it. Above that, I'm going to draw a shape like this, sort of like an S shape for the smoke. I've drawn an S shape, and then I'll click back on this last anchor point and go back in the opposite direction. So I'll put a point here and drag this way, and then go back to the beginning. I need to bring this handle back. So something roughly like that. I'll eyedropper the white. And then I'm actually going to run a gradient through this. So I want the gradient to go from white to white. And we'll also have some white in the middle. But on one of these areas, I'm going to lower the opacity. So it does that kind of thing. And then I'm going to go to Effects, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and blur it slightly. And then we might have some additional elements like that. So if I took this same kind of shape, and we'll have it another one here. I'm going to rerun that gradient a little bit. And then again, I'm going to apply the Gaussian blur, but this time, let's bring this down a little bit. Let's have it be a little bit sharper. We could put this maybe over here. And I'll put another one over here. We might also create another shape here. I'm going to do this with the ellipse tool. And I'm going to cut it with the scissors. So I'll cut it like maybe there and there. So we create this partial ellipse. And I'm going to have this be a stroke. This time I'm going to have the stroke also be a gradient, but I'm going to have the transparency be at the ends. So it'll be white to white to white. But on each end, it will be set to 0 transparency. And then let's increase the size of that a little bit. And let's also blur it. Not quite as much as that. And then overall, I'll lower the opacity slightly. So we're creating this little like edge. I can duplicate that and maybe scale it smaller slightly so that we get these kind of ripples in the coffee that we've created. So I'm going to make that one a little bit smaller still. And on this one, I'll also lower the opacity a little bit more. So that's the cup of coffee one. It's amazing, really, how quickly you can end up with something which is very realistic illustration or relatively realistic illustration with very little effort. It's really just, if you look at it in outline mode, it's just those shapes and the way that they combine using the effects. So there's a couple more things I need to go over, but I'm going to leave those till Wednesday because that's quite a lot to absorb for right now. But so far, we've covered most of the things that are on this worksheet. I have one more here that I want to show you, which I'll show you on Wednesday, which is basically using a feature in the 3D effects where you can show what's mapped to the surface, but not show the object itself. And then afterwards, you can expand it and manipulate that to create some interesting effects. This one is creating an effect of 3D type where we use the blend tool. So I'll leave those demonstrations for right now. But does anybody have any questions for me? So all of those demonstrations are for the next worksheet, and the worksheet is due on Sunday. But they also tie into the project that you're working on, which is the 3D project number 4, which is the perspective and isometric. On the assignment right now, it says that I want you to create a poster with a city, but I'm going to change that a little bit. So I will change it in the writing on the assignment this week, but I'm going to put it back to how I used to do it, which gives you a little bit more choice. So you can either create a 3D illustration of a city, either using perspective or using isometric, or you can create an interior space, like a bedroom scene or something like that, using either isometric or perspective. Or you could design some kind of a product. So that product might be something like, it could be fantastical, like sci-fi type product, like a product where it reads your dreams whilst you're asleep and then shows you a video of it back in the morning or something like that. So, but I want you to design what that would look like as if you were trying to sell the idea to an investment company. Okay. So those are the 3 options, and I'll change the wording on the assignment itself to reflect that later today. But so that's the next project that you should be working on. I know that you guys should have turned stuff in on Sunday, and I'll take a look at those later today as well. If you're behind on anything and you need help, I will do a lab. It's 2:12 already, so I'm going to start the lab maybe a little bit later today, 2:45, because I want to go and grab a coffee. So depending on how busy Starbucks is, but I'll be here anyway for about an hour or so. I'll send an announcement before I open the lab up. but around about 2:45, and I'll be here for an hour or so for you to, well, up until 3:30, for you to answer questions or help you individually, or if you want me to go over projects that you've turned in as well, I'm quite happy to do that. All right. I don't think there was anybody that came in after I took roll, right? I think I got everybody. Oh, Victoria, I might know I've got you actually. I'll add you there. All right. See you guys.